Welcome back, class. Today we are going to discuss something that you're probably very familiar with, whether you know it or not, and that is plot. And to do this, we're going to construct a diagram, and then we're going to add notes to that diagram as we go along. But before we can construct that diagram, we need to know what plot is and how it ties into our curriculum. So plot are the events in a story. Plot are the events in a story. And this all goes with our standard that we're going to go over today, which is RL 7.3. And RL 7.3 says that you guys have to be able to analyze how particular elements of a story or drama interact. So we have to be able to analyze how particular elements of a story or drama interact. Well, nobody really talks like that. So let's just put it in regular terms that people understand. Okay? How about understand and explain instead of analyze? Right? Understand and explain. If you can understand and explain, you can analyze. How particular elements of a story and drama? How about how plot elements? How plot elements interact or go together. Go or work together. All right, so understand and explain how plot elements go together. And so this is what we have to be able to do to master this standard. We have to be able to understand and explain how these elements work together. Well, to do that, like I said, we're going to draw a diagram. And our notes are going to go along the diagram. Okay, so this is our diagram right here. In the green is our diagram. Okay, well, plot element number 1. Is the exposition. And exposition, you can see, has the word expose, kind of the beginnings of the word expose in it. And so when you expose something, you introduce it. So the exposition is the introduction of details and these are oftentimes include setting and characters. Two very important parts of a story: where it takes place and who it involves. So expose Exposition, exposing is introducing. Introducing of details. A lot of times in your exposition, you're going to get details introduced that are very key parts of the story. And oftentimes that includes your setting and your characters. So part one of our plot, within our plot diagram, is exposition. Exposition. Now we're going to go on to part two, which is on this increase right here, this increasing plane. And part two is your rising action. And your rising action are things before that contribute to the climax of your story. Things before that contribute to the climax of your story. And so this is, your rising action is the buildup. And that is the buildup to part three of our plot diagram, which is the climax. And the climax is oftentimes the turning point. That is the turning point of the story. And that can be either a big surprise, biggest surprise, or the main character can learn a lesson. All right, so the biggest surprise or the main character learns a lesson, and a lot of times that is your climax. So the fourth part of our story is what happens after that, and that is the falling action. The falling action is what happens after, is the result of the climax. That's the result of the climax. So 2, 3, and 4 all kind of go together. What builds up to the climax, what is that turning point, and what is the result of that climax? And your fifth and final portion of your plot diagram is the resolution. And much like with the exposition, resolution has the word solution in it. That can help you remember that this is how the story is resolved. How the story and conflict, forgot that. All right, how the story and the conflict is resolved. So trying to put this in terms that you'll understand. All right, so let's say that there's a fight at school. All right, the exposition, those are the two individuals that are getting ready to fight. All right, they're getting ready to fight. The rising action, that's the trash talk that takes place between the two sides. Person A says you're ugly. Person B says your mama's ugly. Person A retaliates back and says, what'd you say about my mama? And that's all the buildup. And then one person shoves the next one. Person B shoves person A. Person A shoves me back. Now person B swings on him. That's the climax. Boom, that's the turning point, right? They're swinging. They're going back and forth, right? They're swinging on each other. Person B, pow, knocked out. They take an involuntary nap. They're sleeping on the floor because they got knocked out, right? So the falling action, that's the result of the climax. Person B got punched in the face, fell asleep on the way down, and then fell, right? He's knocked out. Now he's taking an involuntary nap on the floor. Everybody's laughing at him because he lost the fight, right? The resolution, how the conflict is resolved. Well, both parties, person B eventually wakes up. Wake up. He wakes up from being knocked out. They both go to the office. They're both written up. They're both suspended. Boom, that is the resolution of the conflict, of the climax, right? So these are your 5 key points of a plot, of the story. Now, I keep talking about conflict. And the question is, where does conflict go on our plot diagram? Well, conflict actually goes, which I just kind of talked about, in the middle. All of this, that's conflict. The entire middle is conflict. All right, and there are 4 types of conflict. Man versus man, or character versus character. You have man versus self. There's just an internal conflict between the man and himself. You have man versus nature. And then you have man versus society. Somebody fighting against what is regularly accepted. And so conflict is in the middle. That's where those 2, 3, and 4 of your plot diagram all kind of work together, because that all makes up the conflict. In the example of the fight I talked about, the rising action was the trash talk. That started the conflict, right? The climax was the fight itself. That's the turning point. And then the kid gets knocked out. That's the end of the fight, the end of the climax. But all of that is the conflict. All of that worked together to create your conflict in the story. So there are 5 parts, technically, of a plot structure. But your conflict involves the entire middle piece. The rising action, the climax, and the falling action all work together to create your conflict, which is either a conflict between 2 characters, a conflict between a character and themselves, a conflict between the character and nature, what surrounds them, and a conflict versus the character and society, which is just a norm, something that is universally recognized as okay, that they're trying to change. And so all of this makes up plot. And what we have to be able to do is not only identify the plot. Identifying the exposition is not enough. Identifying the rise in action is not enough. Being able to point those things out is great. That's wonderful. That's only step 1, though. Remember, we got to be able to analyze or to understand and explain how all of this works together. So how the setting of a story led to the climax. How did the characters that were involved lead to the falling action? How did the rising action lead to the falling action? All of these elements work together. And being able to identify them is only step 1. But remember, we got to understand and explain how they go together, how they work together. And that is what we're going to continue to build on. It's that skill that we're going to build on. Identifying them is step 1. Now we're going to talk about how they all work together within the story, or stories, as we move forward. But you do have an assignment for today. If you have any questions on it, issues, comments, things you just need further clarification on, be sure to reach out to me and let me know. And as always, have a great day.